This week's episode was huge, and it's going to take a while to take down this mammoth of a lineup.
We're about to go in-depth on the bots, the battles, and all the controversy of this week's episode. If you haven't seen it yet, consider this your spoiler warning. Go back and watch it and come right back.
Are you back? Tonight we talk to Ricky Willems, Will Bale's doppelganger, and also Mammoth's team captain. And we're also going to talk to Jen Herchenroeder from our favorite new owl robot, HiJinx.
So strap in for tonight's episode. I'm Will Bales from Hypershock.
We're Mike and Andrea Galately from Team Witch Doctor.
And this is the Tale of the Tape After Show. Welcome to the Tale of the Tape After Show. This week's episode of BattleBots was action-packed, so let's jump right into that 30-second recap.
30 seconds on the clock! Ghost Raptor returns, but his weapon doesn't. Tracer learns the valuable lesson of invertibility, and Kraken gets KO'd by the judges.
Mammoth tries out for the U.S. Olympic gymnastics team, Claw Viper attempts to set a land speed record, and Tyler takes his first win just before his very reasonable bedtime.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it. What more do you want?
No title fight?
No, that's it. Let's get a roll on.
Okay then.
So tonight in our deep dive segment, we're going to start off with the hugest, mammothest, giantest match we've ever seen with Mammoth versus Huge. And tonight we actually have Ricky Willems on our show to tell us a little bit about his take on that match.
Everything is new with Mammoth this year. The lifter design, first off, we got a much more powerful motor. We're putting something like 4 times the power out to the weapon. We've got these nice big hooks on the end of the weapon that are able to grip on and throw the opponent, which makes all the difference in the world. That's actually Bite Force's old motor from a couple of years ago. We bought that off Paul. We put about twice the amount of power into it that he did, and we geared it down real low so that we've got a ton of strength to hoist and throw robots across the room. So a big lift comes down to 3 things. You need power, you need geometry, and you need purchase on your target. The geometry took a lot of work, actually, and in fact, we were still figuring it out all the way through the season this year. Since it's hard to have other robots on hand to test with and throw around, we kept tweaking and changing things. But generally, it's those front legs that stick out. That gives us something to brace against while we lift and throw those opponents. The second third of that is the power, right? So we've got about 100 horsepower that we can throw into this motor, and that lets us really launch the opponents. We've geared it down, so there's something like 7,500 foot-pounds of torque on that shaft that we're using to flip and throw our opponents, which means that we can lift something like 2,000, 2,500 pounds, depending on exactly where we're grabbing them. The last thing, of course, is purchase, right? So you'll see in our first 2 fights, we've been using our floppy weapon. That has big, sharp titanium tips that are meant to grab onto the opponent and dig in if they've got a soft exterior. And then on our regular weapon, we have hardened AR-400 teeth, basically, that come off, grab on, get under, and throw the opponent ultimately.
Before we go to the next one, can we address the elephant in the room? If you're ready.
I guess I'm ready. As ready as I'll ever be.
All right, let's start with some simple ones. What did you change this year? They said that you didn't change anything. Did you actually not change anything?
Well, they were right in that we did keep a lot of things the same because we had our best season ever last season. So we really wanted to be careful not to mess anything up. There's a, kind of unnamed curse on the runner-up every season where, Minotaur last year made their weapons just a little bit bigger and they had issues getting that to spin up the same way it was before. So we didn't want to do anything like that. But obviously this is still a whole brand new robot. None of these parts are even compatible with the old robot. So we did make quite a bit of change. And one change we did make, which really played into this match, is that we changed the geometry of our self-righting mechanism just a little bit. We made it a little bit longer. The points that touch the ground are a little bit more spread out, so it's a little more stable. And then, of course, we get matched up with Hydra first fight. So in the test box right before this fight, we were putting the robot on its back, flipping it, putting it back, just to make sure that the gearbox was going to work, the chain was going to work. Everything was as good as it can be.
We figured you were just showing off.
No, we knew we were going to have to self-right at least once. So we wanted to make sure, obviously, you don't want to lose against a flipper upside down. You know that you're going to get tossed around. So,
well, it definitely worked. And when we saw it, you ended the match up right side up, and you were never upside down for more than a second, if that.
Yeah.
So kudos on actually making the self-rider work. I'm jealous. And of course it's Hydra, so you got thrown around a little bit. That's par for the course. Why did a disc break though?
I'm glad you noticed, actually. So a lot of people haven't noticed yet that our weapon broke. I mentioned it in our interview. Andrea mentioned it when they asked her some questions, but they cut some of those out.
It was really hard to notice that the whole robot was like, jumping all around like the whole time. But other than that,
so it's not till after we get one big hit on Hydra and we send them flying, which did quite a bit of damage to Hydra, actually. He gets us against the wall, and there's a little bit of a back and forth, and then we kind of get another hit on him, and we kind of like scrape off the top of him, and that's when the disc piece goes flying.
So, I mean, at this point, last year you threw Gigabyte around like a rag doll without any issues, with no cracked discs at all. So at this point in the event, what's going through your mind? Like, what do you think the probable cause is?
I'm not super concerned it's going to be a recurring issue. Partly because there's a new floor on the BattleBots, and it's a lot thicker. So not only did Hydra toss us up, 15 feet in the air, and we landed on the weapon, but we landed on a half-inch plate of steel, which last year you saw a lot of robots tear through the floor because it was a lot thinner.
Right.
So, considering how high up we went and that we hit a really thick piece of steel, and only one disc broke, we're hoping it's not going to be a recurring issue.
All right. Well, I mean, you ended the fight with a working weapon, despite a smoke screen? What was that?
Yeah, so either from the shock of getting thrown so many times, or the the extra current draw of trying to spin an unbalanced weapon for 3 minutes, basically the batteries started to let out some toxic fumes. So
Magic smoke.
So, which is par for the course for us. We like to smoke stuff. Last year,
especially our first match.
Yeah, especially. Got to come out. Really set the bar high. The disc broke so early on in the match that we weren't able to. Because of the judging criteria, like you have to get to get damage points, you have to get points, or you have to use your active weapon.
That's a really good point, because a lot of people don't know, because they see both of us with controllers in our hands during the match. And Mike's doing the driving, and he's also controlling the self-righting mechanism, but I'm controlling the weapon. So when I see that the weapon breaks, I have the option of just turning it off, and then the robot would drive perfectly, and Mike could try to control the match with driving. But in other seasons, we've seen the judging criteria be so harsh on not using your active weapon that I'm thinking, if I slow down the weapon, if we're not spinning, we're going to lose this if it goes to a judge's decision. So we're actually make the conscious decision to sacrifice our driving ability quite a bit in order to be able to keep that weapon going.
So we hear John, who's the referee, telling Hydra, hey, I can't see movement, or whatever, I need to see movement. And he tells us, Witch Doctor, I can't see. So we basically disengage Hydra at that point, which is like 30-ish seconds left of the match, because we're creating this like smoke screen. I go over, just to show a little bit of aggression at the end, I go over and I push Hydra clean out of the blue square, and they are not moving at all at this point. But unfortunately, because the weapon was not, balanced at that point because of the broken disc, we really could have taken an opportunity, had the weapon been working, to obliterate Hydra right there. But
you would have taken him out, because they don't have a spare chassis.
Hats off to the Waiachi guys. Like, Hydra is an amazing machine.
It's amazing.
And it's all titanium, formed titanium. It's all welded, but there's only one Hydra in existence. So, you hear...
You actually taunt him about that at the being of the match.
Yeah, you did.
So I mean, I love Jake. He's hilarious, and he plays this like tough guy. Has like good old boy from Wisconsin, but he's like a big teddy bear. I think deep down inside, he just can't show it because Wisconsin. He's got to have a chip on his shoulder or whatever. But
I think that mean streak comes out a little bit more when he's nervous too. I think he was really nervous before this fight, and that was because I've never heard Jake be that mean. We've gotten messages of people asking us, like, is that guy just a jerk? My parents called me, They were so insulted that Jake was so mean, but that's not who Jake is, really.
Right. It's almost like last episode with Bunny telling Kurt to suck it. Bunny's really nice. She's incredibly nice, like overly nice. So I'm sure she felt terrible when she saw the episode for the first time, and it's edited that way. It happened to make her look, very aggressive, which she's competitive, but she's like so nice. So yeah, don't forget, it's show, and we try to be our best personalities.
But, short of us taking the win, which obviously we would have loved to do, I think this was an awesome opening match for us. It was the ultimate test of reliability, which is something we've had an issue with in the past, and I think we've proved that we fixed that for this season. And it had everything. It had airtime, it had smoke, it had screws. We got some nice titanium sparks on Hydra. So I think it was, we can't ask a lot more than that for an opening match. Alright, so now I want to spend some time talking about a robot that had a whole lot of hype before its first match. Hijinx did an amazing job of keeping its design a secret, even from all us builders, which is really, really hard to do.
I knew.
You knew? I didn't know.
I was their sponsor. Of course I knew.
Yeah.
He had to pay money to find out what Hijinx was. That's how good they were about keeping a secret.
Worth it.
So we saw that they had some issues in their first match, but the unveil of the design was glorious. Props to them for keeping it a secret even throughout the pandemic. And even though we saw them have some issues their first match, I think it has a lot of promise, and I love the innovative design. So let's hear it directly from Jen to see what Hijinx is all about.
The original design for Hijinx was actually going to be the new Scorpios. So in the original renders, Hijinx looks like Scorpios. It's blue and chrome and black, and the tail has a big segmented scorpion tail, and sort of, the claws become the weapon. That was the theme going in. But BattleBots really wanted to keep Scorpios as a top attack robot for continuity and for other reasons. So they gave us an opportunity to redesign the robot and then potentially submit both. So you can imagine me sitting in Orion's kitchen, and his partner Adrian is there, and we're just bouncing ideas off of each other. Like, well, what does it look like if it's not a scorpion? I think we were like watching cartoons and very sleep deprived, and I was wearing a t-shirt that said "Owl yeah," and it was like a synthwave space owl, and we just kept coming back to this idea about like a 1980s bright colors, CMYK, old print style, make it really loud, make it much like a cartoon, something that kids can enjoy and would appeal to the small children who watch the show and want to get into engineering, but would also be a really like fun throwback design. So we made it an owl, and then a bunch of little details started coming together, like Athena and Minerva, the goddesses of like strategic warfare and combat. They are represented by owls, and like all of these little owl themed things started coming in, and it just made more and more sense over time. So I think it was a little bit of kismet. It was a little bit of serendipity that we stumbled across this idea and went with it, and I think it worked out really well. There were lots of stages of development where it looked a bit different from how it does now, and ultimately it is as trim as it possibly can be around the weapon stack, around the two motors that make up the direct drive for the weapon, and then we kind of brought all of the armor in as tight as possible around this so that we could make weight and have the longest wingspan possible so that we could have the longest bar possible. So we originally started thinking a 36-inch weapon would be great, but then what if we could have a 48-inch weapon? Wouldn't that be greater? And a lot of the design decisions around the entire robot are based on wanting to have basically the longest reach possible on a horizontal, and that really came together. So we started with the drive as our critical system, and we did a lot of tests. Between January and March, we had the robot on the ground outside of the hackerspace, rolling around the parking lot. There was an entirely different drive system from what we currently have. We had a belt system, which we deleted because it didn't work the way we wanted it to. The belts were getting too hot, they were chewing up. We thought we had it really well refined, and we really loved the way that it moved. It seemed very fast, it seemed very maneuverable. When we had it on the ground in the parking lot, it seemed to turn on a dime. It was very easy to drive. It did everything we wanted it to, so we just kind of had the drive, checkbox, done. Drive is finished. We know that drive is okay. So we can now move on to make sure that the weapon does everything it's supposed to do. but there are tests that you just can't do in a hackerspace parking lot, not least of which being when you have a robot with a large weapon, you cannot spin it up and run it into something. So based on the success of Rex, based on the success of Scorpios, in terms of the weapon working well, we were very confident that the weapon was going to be able to absorb impact. And the top of the weapon stack has a clamp collar that holds whatnots together, but also slips and moves when the robot takes a big hit. So we were sure the weapon would be fine. What we also thought was that when the robot took a big hit, or when it made a big hit, we assumed it would move. We assumed that the whole robot would just kind of shift. What happened instead is that the robot planted on its wheels on the arena floor. And in years past, if we made a big impact, you can see both robots go flying one way or another. We kind of assumed that that was going to happen for us. So the wheels are 1-inch thick UHMW, and they have a bike tire tread very carefully and very strongly attached to the outside. And we wanted it to be grippy enough that we could have enough traction to be maneuverable, but we didn't anticipate that it would grip so well that on a big hit, the wheels would plant to the floor, and all of that shock load from the weapon making an impact, pushing against the robot, went back up into the wheels and then into the gearboxes. And if we had stuck with the belt system, it might have been a different result, but what happened inside the gearboxes is those little gears just crunched. So on the one side, we sheared the sun gear, and on the other side, we crunched a planet, and at that point, the robot could not drive. But you can kind of see in the course of the match, Orion is trying to negotiate the robot on one drive, and then the second drive also fails. Every time we took a hit, they were putting damage back into the gearboxes. So once we figured out that that was what caused us to stop moving, immediately had a quick mechanical solution. We removed the keyways, the key stock rather, and we had the aluminum hub basically clamped onto the shaft. And the expectation was, well, this way, if we take a big hit and the wheel plants, the whole robot can move on the wheel still. The hub will slip around the shaft, and we won't have all of that energy going back into the gearboxes.
In this week's Chris Roast of the Week, Chris takes a break from roasting all us builders and roasts his own co-host.
By the way, I'm going as Kenny Florian next year for Halloween. I've already ordered my costume. 2 giant satellite dishes as my ears, and I'll throw a beard on.
Don't scare anyone with the mask.
Oh, someone better get Extinguisher, because that burn was sick! This week's Behind the Bots fan question of the week is coming directly from Luke and Kyle from Norwalk Havoc, which is happening right now over the weekend. So let's go straight to them.
Hey everybody, this is Luke and Kyle from Behind the Bots coming to you live from Norwalk Havoc, where they are having the Norwalk Havoc December Finals. With this week's biggest fan question sent in from Dominic Waite. Dominic asks, what's your take on the new damage weighting for judges' decisions? Does it make grapplers and control bots very weak against spinners, since they basically have to take cosmetic damage just to work as intended? Great question, Dominic.
Well, I think we could speculate about this question till we're blue in the face, but let's hear it from the co-creator and executive producer of BattleBots himself, Greg Munson.
Hey, Tail of the Tape. Hey, Dominic. Thanks for your question. Last year, the scoring criteria was indeed 3 points for damage and 2 points for control and aggression. We've upped that for this season to 5 points for damage, but also 3 points instead of 2 for control and aggression. So everything got bumped up a little bit. The reason why we did this is because in the off season, we always meet with the judges and we always say what went right, what went wrong. This decision didn't go the way we thought it should. Why, judges, did you think it that way? What do we need to change in the rules to make this better in the future, et cetera, et cetera. One thing the judges wanted to do was to have more fidelity in these very tight decisions so they could render a better decision. So that's why we went to 5-3-3 instead of 3-2-2. Now, the specific question, does damage, the way we interpret damage, does that hinder a control bot from ever winning? And I don't think it does hinder. I think back in 2015 it did. So you got to remember the historical progression of the judging rules. Let's go way back to 2000 when we were on Comedy Central, and we had a ton of fights where it was just wedges pushing each other, and it was so boring that the show got canceled, and that's a bad thing. When we got rebooted in 2015, we knew we had to have damage and action, so we biased the rules towards weapon damage. you're going to get those damage points if the weapon is damaging and blowing stuff up and causing, massive amounts of damage. And you'll also get those aggression points if the weapon is being aggressive. But if you're just wedging and pushing and shoving, you're not going to get as many of those points. Maybe not any of those points, especially back in 2015. Now that has evolved because there were some fights that were good fights. There was robots like Duck, there's robots like Gruff, there's even robots like Kraken who will try to control a fight or push the fight or wedge the fight. And those are entertaining fights. They're not boring, they're good. So from 2015 to now in 2020, we have tweaked the judging criteria rules that the judges use to render their decisions on the different categories to say that, hey, if you're wedging and pushing and shoving another bot and you're doing damage, that's the key, and you're doing damage. You're slamming it into the screws, you're slamming it into the wall, you're slamming it into the pulverizers, and you're hammering on them. That counts. That's real damage. You're going to get points for that. And if you're doing that, that's also aggression. You're going to get aggression points for that. And obviously, if you're doing that, you're going to get control points. So there's an absolute pathway for a control bot who doesn't have a big spinning weapon to win a judge decision. Absolutely. They just have to do damage. They can't just wedge in the middle of the arena and kind of grapple and kind of drag around. They got to grapple, drag, push into the screws, push into the hammers, slam the hammers down. They've got to actually do some damage or they're not going to get those damage points, even though they may be controlling the fight. You have to control, not only win control, but you got to win aggression and you got to win damage, or you got to win enough of those three categories to get the judge's decision. But there is an absolute pathway in the 2020 version of the judging rules to make that happen.
Well, I guess you can't really argue with that. It's literally his show.
Tonight's thing of the week is Hit of the Week.
Yeah. Ooh, dibs. Can I get this one?
Yes.
Go for
Okay,
it.
it's definitely Mammoth and Huge. Like, I don't know which one to count because it was all amazing. But like the front flips and the back flips and then just like all over the place. I mean, I don't know how all that works. It was amazing.
I have no idea how it worked either. That's why we're going to ask Technical T-Rex.
Who is the technical
T-Rex, Technical T-Rex. The T in T-Rex stands for technical.
With the largest weapon in the competition, Mammoth uses a low speed and extremely high torque weapon to throw robots across the arena. This high torque also acts as a high-powered self-rider that can actually throw Mammoth into the air. Both robots use a plastic called a UHMW to help deflect energy from large spinning weapons. Instead of trying to fend off the attack like a metal shield, Huge's wheels and Mammoth's legs absorb the energy of the hit and reduce the overall damage to the robot. In this fight, Mammoth's weapon was also made of UHMW. The springy nature of the plastic allowed it to deflect during its hits and toss Mammoth in the air when it released. Combined with the high torque of the spinner, the plastic weapon on Mammoth resulted in more somersaults and bouncing than we've ever seen.
I have no idea who that is. But it is the end of our show. So but the last thing is our weekly montage. So take a moment, sit back, and honor the fallen robots of this week. Tell the Tape, Episode 2.
Oh no, we looked the wrong way. I know. We'll have to invert the videos.
Technical T-Rex, Technical T-Rex. The T in T-Rex stands for technical.
Now, if I could only get the technical T-Rock song out of my head.
T-Rock?
T-Rex song.
Technical T-Rock. Yeah.
We should just let technical T-Rex do the whole show.
No.